Hi, this podcast discusses the role of the superintendent of public instruction in California, often referred to as the superintendent or the SPI. It is a nonpartisan office. It originally was partisan. The superintendent of public instruction, the SPI, is the elected executive officer of the California Department of Education, and as such, the SPI directs all functions of the Department of Education. He or she executes policies set by the California State Board of Education, and the SPI also heads and chairs the State Board of Education. In addition, the SPI serves as the state's chief spokesperson for public schools, provides education policy and direction to the local school districts, and also serves as an ex officio member of the two governing boards of the state's higher education system, the University of California Board of Regents and the Board of Trustees for the California State University system. There are a number of both constitutional and statutory provisions related to the SPI. In Article 2, Section 6A, which is voting and direct democracy, it provides that the office of the superintendent of public instruction is nonpartisan, as I mentioned. There's also Article 5, of course, dealing with the executive branch that has a number of provisions related to the SPI. In Article 5, Section 5B, it provides that whenever there's a vacancy in the office of SPI, then the governor is required to nominate a person to fill that vacancy who takes office upon confirmation by a majority of senators and a majority of assembly members, and then holds office for the balance of the unexpired term. In Article 5, Section 14, the conflict of interest provisions also apply to the superintendent as a defined state officer. In Article 9 of the state constitution, it actually deals with education, and the SPI plays a prominent role in this regard. For example, in Section 2, the SPI is to be elected by the qualified electors of this state at the time of each gubernatorial election. Also, the SPI enters the office on the first Monday after the first day of January that follows, of course, the gubernatorial election. Also, like the other state officers, no superintendent may serve more than 2 4-year terms. Pursuant to Section 2.1 of Article 9, the State Board of Education, on the nomination of the superintendent, is required to appoint 1 deputy SPI and 3 associate superintendents, who are then exempt from the state civil service system, and their terms are 4 years in office. Now, note that this should not be construed as prohibiting the appointment of additional associate SPIs who could be subject to state civil service. And then finally, in Article 9, Section 9 of the state constitution, it explicitly states that the superintendent is an ex officio member of the University of California Corporation, which is, of course, known as the Board of Regents of the UC system. In turning to the statutory provisions, there are numerous ones related to the SPI. Naturally, most of them are found in the California Education Code, but I at least wanted to discuss a few of those that are contained in the Government Code. And here in Section 7.6E, the SPI is authorized to designate any person in his or her office holding specified positions to act as a deputy for purposes of the laws applicable to the SPI. However, the SPI is prohibited from appointing anyone to act as his or her deputy at meetings of either the State Board of Education, the Regents of the University of California, or the trustee board for the California State University system. Pursuant to Section 7.9, the SPI, the superintendent, is allowed to designate any deputy in his or her office to act in his or her place on other boards and commissions or governing boards where the SPI has a duty, except the 3 mentioned. The SPI in designating a deputy is responsible for the acts of that deputy, as you might expect. And Article 2 concerns the vacancies, as I mentioned earlier, from the Constitution in terms of nomination by a gubernatorial appointee and then confirmation by a majority of the two houses of the legislature. Chapter 26 deals with federal funding, and Section 7561 of the Government Code provides that our superintendent is responsible for supervising education and related services for handicapped children that's required by federal law under the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. Chapter 26.5 deals with interagency responsibilities for providing services to children with disabilities. And in fact, Government Code Section 7570 makes it a joint responsibility of both the SPI as well as the Health and Human Services Agency Secretary, who is a gubernatorial appointee, to ensure that children with disabilities are provided with designated instruction and services. Then Section 7573 provides that the SPI is required to ensure that local education agencies provide special education and that those related services and instruction are necessary for the child to benefit educationally from that instructional program. Chapter 13 establishes the California Broadband Council and specifies that the council's membership includes the SPI or the SPI's designee. Section 15490 establishes the State Allocation Board, which consists of a number of individuals, including the superintendent. Then there's Section 95006, which specifies that California's Early Intervention Services Act is administered with shared direction from the SPI, as well as the Health and Human Services Agency Secretary. Chapter 2.7 covers energy conservation in public buildings, and specifically Section 15814.24 specifies that the superintendent is required to apportion state aid equal to the amount necessary for each school district to meet its energy service contract obligations. In addition, state law and the government code authorizes the superintendent and the controller to withhold from annual apportionment any funds necessary to satisfy annual energy service contracts obligations that are obligated to the Public Works Board of the state of California. Article 2 also deals with costs, specific ones that are mandated by the state. And so Section 17581.9 appropriates monies from the general fund to the superintendent for allocation to school districts as well as county superintendents of schools in the manner that's established by law. And then finally is Article 9 in the Government Code that deals with financial reports. And Section 53892.1 requires the SPI to make available to the California State Controller data and other matters that are required by law for the purpose of permitting the compilation of financial transactions of California's numerous school districts.